What is more classic in the automotive industry than Ford versus Chevy?
Especially when it comes to pickup trucks. And the two manufacturers are set to battle in basically every possible way they can. And that includes these full-size electric trucks. And despite them both having frunks and these giant LED light bars and an allergy to gas, these two couldn't be any more different.
Yeah, and so we're going to spend a week driving them like how most people drive their trucks, which is to say an SUV with a bed on the back. So I'm going to focus on the Lightning, and Mike,
I'm going to focus on the Silverado RST EV, and there's probably more letters. Oh, Max. Okay, so let's get into the Silverado EV because there's a lot to unpack it here. So starting with the name, I still don't think it should have been Silverado EV. I think they should have called it the Avalanche, or if you really wanted to use that Silverado name, the Silverado Avalanche, Silverado Avalanche EV, something, because it is more Avalanche in shape. And I know it was only a one generation model, but so many people remember it. And when you see the Silverado EV from the side, it instantly reminds you of it. And it even has a midgate, you know, where you can take out the back window and fold down the actual wall. And this one has a beam in the middle that does come off, and then you extend your bed into where the rear seats were. This is a big truck. It is a full-size truck. It measures in at 233.1 inches in length, which is big. I know I've been saying big a lot, but it applies to everything. It's almost 80 inches wide and it's 84 inches tall, which is big. So while we're on the topic of trick features, besides the multi-flex midgate, there's the multi-flex tailgate. This is another feature that may seem kind of like a gimmick, but it's actually pretty useful. I like how you can just open the top part or the whole tailgate and then it turns into a set of steps or a bench. And although this truck doesn't have it, you can also get an audio system inserted there for optimal tailgating. You can power release that tailgate, but you can't actually power lift and close it like you can in the F-150 Lightning. The frunk though, the front trunk is power operated and it's pretty sizable, although the opening isn't as wide and deep as the F-150s.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the styling of the F-150 Lightning because you know what it looks like. You know what an F-150 looks like. It's a very familiar shape, and something we're going to talk about a lot this video is that it's a regular F-150 that happens to be electric. There's not a lot of change. So you get the fluorescent tube style LED light bar up front, which I actually think is a pretty cool look. And it goes across the entire front because, of course, there is no proper grille. There's just something that kind of looks like it with a nice geometric pattern, I might add. And then out back, because this is a Lariat trim, you get the light bar atop the tailgate as well. Now, for better or worse, this is a regular F-150 interior. This is a Lariat, so it's not the top trim, unlike the Chevy, and so it's reasonably well appointed. There are more toys that you can get if you get a Platinum, which then also makes up some of the price gap, which we'll get to a little later. I think it's appropriate for this level of vehicle. I mean, I like the quasi-denim-y look to the materials on the dashboard and the door, and the dark brown stitching. It's nice, it's subdued. I have the huge center screen, the portrait style one, some weirdness with the center touchscreen. I am able to hook up Apple CarPlay pretty quickly and it's wireless and that's great, but there were some weird glitches with it where my audio streaming would just disappear. It would look like it was playing, but we'd get no audio. The strange thing is that I could go to any other audio source and have it just fine. So the Lightning does not have a head-up display, but it does have a really nice digital instrument cluster, which is very customizable. You can pull whatever info you want for the center section. There's a lot to choose from, and it's pretty quick. I like the big 3-spoke steering wheel. I guess technically 4, because there is a hole down at the bottom, but the shape is just like these other 2 spokes. It's good. The shifter still feels a little cheap. It just rattles around a little bit. That's probably because this is the power-operated shifter, so I can fold it down, which then allows me to fold out this center console into a workspace. Speaking of, there's so much storage in these doors. I can fit multiple drinks in the lower section and then something small down here just below the regular door handle. I say regular, but I actually mean the opposite. It's those weird electronic pull ones that Ford debuted in the Mach-E. I had one passenger very confused about how to get out of the vehicle. Of course, once you're used to it, it's fine.
Although I haven't outright said it, you may have noticed by now that the Silverado EV is the flashier vehicle, the one that's trying to impress more, that wants to be remembered and noticed. Inside, it kind of tones that down, and it's a lot closer to the F-150. Now, there's technology in here that's not in the F-150, and there's technology in the F-150 that's not here. What I do like better here, though, is the infotainment system. It's a 17.7-inch diagonal system, as opposed to the Lightning's tablet. And I'm not a fan of the tablet style that's found in many Fords and Subarus and Teslas. I prefer this style, and this system, although there is only a volume knob, which I complain about a lot, it is super responsive. Like, I don't know if I've played with an infotainment system that's as responsive as this. If I want to fire through satellite radio stations, it'll change them as fast as I can possibly hit them. There is climate control built into the screen, but there's also physical buttons below and a dual zone knob for both the front passengers. Fantastic physical buttons, and I hope more come. Now, there is something missing in this system, and I say it every time I drive a Chevy EV, and I will till it's fixed. There's no Apple CarPlay. A big miss. I've gone on many rants about this. Yes, you get 72 gigabytes of data to go with the built-in Google system that can be used on Google Maps and whatnot, but it's not the same. People like me just want to pair their phone and all the apps on their phone with the settings they want to work. I don't want to have to get into a second system, reset the settings, and anyway, enough about that. Back to things I like. Number one, by far, I say it every time it's available in a GM product, Super Cruise. Love it, love it, love it, love it. And I do a lot of highway driving, and this thing has the range to do a lot of highway driving, so it's a great match. The F-150 has a lot of rear seat space, easily fits 6 feeters. It's no different here. But the good legroom in the F-150 becomes ridiculously good in this vehicle. There is so much rear legroom. I don't know why anyone would need so much. I figure it's to give a little more space for the midgate, but hey, if you're stuck in the back of a Silverado EV, you're probably not going to complain about space, but maybe about sight lines, because the high belt line on this vehicle makes the windows seem quite high up as far as the body goes and where the window starts. And it's even more so in the rear, because the rear seat passengers, their heads against the pillar, and they can't really see out if they're leaning against the seat back.
If there's one thing we're going to repeat throughout this comparison, it's that the Lightning is the more traditionally truck-like of these two. And sadly, a point against it is that that also applies in the city. Now, I've gone on record as saying this is the best riding F-150, and I'm going to stand by that because I think it is. You have an independent suspension front and rear. Also, the F-150 has almost quaint 20-inch alloys against the 24s on the Chevy. And it's just nice to have actual sidewall. Although maybe it doesn't actually contribute to a better ride quite as much as you might think. Now out here on the highway, this is the Lightning's strength. It's so smooth and planted on the highway because all that extra weight is down low. And so you don't get a whole ton of wind noise either, even for something as big and blocky as this. And it's just very comfortable. I've done more highway miles than I expected to in this, so the split is a little unfair. And yet, even doing that, I have ended up at the quoted efficiency rating. I'm right on par. So I think that's a really good sign for the Lightning because, well, as we're going to talk about in a bit, in terms of power and especially range, it just is a little behind the Chevy, at least on paper. I also like the braking coach. Now, if you're driving like me with one pedal, because I just prefer that in the city, even if it doesn't help with this stiffer suspension, then it's really easy to get 100% power back. I know that that's just a quote and it's a nice little gamification and it's not like you're getting literally all the power back, but still, it's just nice to be told you're driving well. So 100% back right there. Actually, on that note, so I have been driving on the highway for most of this filming. I got off a little bit ago and I've actually lowered my improved my efficiency rating just in the half hour or so. Now I'm looking at 25 kilowatts per 100 kilometers, which works out to, well, almost exactly what Ford quotes in terms of total range based on the battery size. So even though I have talked about how this is the harsher riding of the two, I still prefer how it drives. And that's because its responses and its steering and its handling are just more my speed. They're a little more predictable. Yes, the Chevy does have the advantage of four-wheel steer, so it has an incredibly good turning circle that reminds you that this is a big truck. I mean, so is that, but it doesn't feel that way when you're turning around. This always does, but again, consistency. Oh, all right, this is where the Chevy has the advantage. I can turn around on this street because it's wide, but only can the Chevy actually pull a complete U-turn on a two-lane country road. The F-150 can only hope to do that. This really does just feel like I'm driving a regular F-150. But because the weight is so down low in the Lightning, it handles much tidier than a traditional F-150. Of course, one of the big selling features for both of these trucks is that they have hands-free, semi-automated highway driving. I will say I have a slight preference for Chevy's system though. Super Cruise is very good, and I just find it's a little more natural in its responses, and I also love the light bar in the steering wheel. That's such a quick, easy way to know whether it's active or not. Whereas this, you have to rely on the instrument cluster, and it just kind of turns off very quickly.
These two trucks are very different, and it really all stems down to the suspension and chassis. So this is a unibody, which is a lot more like a car, minivan, and most SUVs on the road today, whereas the F-150 is still an F-150, and it's a body-on-frame truck that just happens to have electric motors. So not being tied to a traditional truck chassis, the Silverado EV can have some other trick features. It has an air suspension and active ride control, and like most vehicles with air suspension, there's an entry mode and an off-road mode, and it doesn't go as high as the Hummer EV, but it still gives a decent amount of ground clearance. There's four-wheel steer on this vehicle, the RST Max, which is a huge help around town. Now, a couple weeks ago, we had the Macan EV with four-wheel steer, and I mentioned how nimble it makes the vehicle drive. And I wouldn't say it does the same in the Silverado EV, but what it does do is make this truck much more livable. There were a couple times during our driving and filming where we had to do U-turns or tight corners, and the Silverado did it in one shot, no problem, while the F-150 had to do a massive three-point turn. It just helps out because this vehicle does feel larger when driving, even if the dimensions aren't that different between the two trucks. Now that said, there are a lot of the usual truck things here. There's a trailer brake control. It has an 8-lug wheel. Now that has to do with the weight, which, while on the topic, it's just one of many things that Chevrolet doesn't fully disclose. There's no official weight listed on this vehicle. We do know through various means that it's roughly, I'd say, around 8,700 pounds. It's under 9,000, but it's definitely at least 8,000. Now, a lot of that weight is in the battery pack because it is massive, like I mentioned before. So it's pretty condensed and pretty low. So this doesn't drive like an 8,000 pound straight truck, but the heft is there, and the 275 wide tires at all four corners, well, they're on 24-inch wheels, which are also massive, and they need 61 PSI in the front and 69 in the rear. But yeah, back to actually driving the truck. So the F-150, it's easier to drive. Maybe it's because it's more familiar feeling like an F-150, but it just feels more nimble and lighter on its feet because, well, it is. This just is a little more ponderous, but it is a much more comfortable vehicle to drive as the suspension absorbs bumps so much better than the F-150, and Chevy's really just done a good job of balancing the comfort and the handling. Like I said, this isn't a great handling truck, but it's not meant to be even if it says RST on the back. That said, at no point do I ever not feel fully in control or the truck does what I want. It's only during a wide open Watts launch that it gets a little squirrely. Now, when it comes to motors and batteries, Chevrolet is a little light on details. We do know that when it's on its maximum power, wide open watts, or wow, get it? It makes 760 horsepower and 785 pound-feet of torque. That's up from last year's model. But when you're not using that mode, or when you're not in sport mode, we don't really know how much power is in the truck. It's noticeably slower. And when I drove a 24 model last year, I said it's probably in the 500 horsepower range. I know what you're thinking, that's a lot of power. And it is, but it's not exactly gonna throw you back in your seat like having 760. When you do those launches, Chevy says it'll do 60 miles an hour from a standstill in 4.5 seconds. Again, not the fastest EV, but for one that weighs as much, that's pretty good. And the reason I say one that weighs this much is the battery pack. It's another area we don't fully know. What we do know is this is a 24 module pack because this is the RST Max, whereas the RST has a 20 module and the shorter range ones have a 12 module. What that relates to in kilowatt hours, well, Chevrolet doesn't fully tell us, but we do know it's around 200 kilowatt hour. This one's probably over a bit, sort of like the Hummer EV, whereas I think the 20 module might be just under. So yeah, that's massive in the world of batteries, and it does take a long time to charge this. Thankfully, this is a 800 volt architecture, and it will charge it up to 350 kilowatt. But good luck ever finding somewhere that will give you anything near that power. More importantly, for those that charge at home, folks like me, the onboard charger is even more powerful this year. It's now 19.2 kilowatts. That's pretty hefty, and the 240 volt in the bed can outboard 7.2 kilowatt, which again is pretty hefty. And speaking of impressive numbers, well, a massive battery leads to a massive range, and this thing can do 460 miles on a single charge according to Chevrolet, which is 740 kilometers. That's huge. Now, to recharge it does take a long time, regardless of how much power is being fed into it. But I think for most users, you're not going to deplete it daily and recharge it. That would be ridiculous amounts of driving. So I applaud Chevy for giving it such a massive battery, because we all know if this is used as a truck and the bed's at its maximum payload, or you're towing anything near 10 to 12,000 pounds, range is going to be hurt. And it's nice that you have that extra power in this massive battery. The brakes are quite good, and you can one pedal drive this. My only complaint is when I hit the brake pedal, it makes this weird little squeak noise. And that may be specific to this vehicle. It's not the actual brakes, it's the pedal, but it's just a little annoying if you have no radio or audio playing at the time. So to wrap it up, let's get into price. This is the top Silverado EV, the RST Max. There are no higher trims, and there aren't too many options, and this one really only has the hard tonneau cover and the floor mats added. So in the US, as tested with destination charges, well, it's $99,840. So it just clips underneath $100,000. The problem is, compared to the F-150 we have on hand for testing, that's almost $20,000 in difference. Now, in full fairness to Chevrolet, that's not the Platinum F-150 Lightning, and if you get that, pricing gets much more competitive. And in Canada, it's the same story. It's $123,000 as tested for this vehicle with destination charges.
So after driving both of these, like we said at the beginning, they're two very different approaches. This is a good truck that happens to be electric. One of the positives, it's an F-150. It feels just like an F-150, just with electric motors. But you have to deal with the drawbacks of an occasionally rough ride like a regular truck.
Well, this here is an electric vehicle that just happens to be a truck, but there's drawbacks as well. It feels way bigger inside than that does, and there's so much technology. I'd be a little afraid taking this seriously off-road or really stressing the tow rating on it. And that kind of brings us to the conclusion. This is a comparison of electric pickup trucks, and if that's the case, the F-150 is the better truck.